I've got Professor Debra Henly with me, who's the Senior Deputy Vice-Chancellor here at Griffith University. And I suppose for transparency, Debra's my boss's boss, so I've got to watch what I do here. But Debra, how is technology-enhanced learning governed at Griffith, and what role do you play in that?
Thanks, Michael, and thanks very much for inviting me to contribute to this series of podcasts. We govern the Technology Enhanced Learning through our Digital Governance Board, which is a high-level committee that I chair, responsible for all elements of our digital campus and our blended and digital learning. So representatives on that board include a number of the other DVCs, the Vice-Chancellors, and contributions from your area of the University Learning Futures, as well as some our top technical people. So we brought together a high-level committee with that cross-institutional representation, because we see that technology-enhanced learning and our digital campus, as well as obviously our physical campuses, it's a whole of institution initiative, and we need to have that whole of institutional oversight.
So what's your kind of vision of how technology-enhanced learning will evolve over the next 3 to 5 years at Griffith, and within the sector for that matter?
I think it's going to be a really interesting period in time. Clearly, as with everybody else, we've experienced a step change. We obviously did have quite a lot of technology enhanced learning going on before COVID. Now everybody's doing it. So I think it's a springboard for us to be able to do some different things that perhaps we had planned to do anyway, but more quickly and at scale. I think there's a number of really interesting opportunities for us. The biggest thing that's going to be facing universities and our graduates over the next 3 to 5 years is going to be employability. Our graduates, generally younger people, will be entering a job market that is severely disrupted, and at least for the next short to medium term, clearly it's going to be difficult for them to get jobs. So I see, in addition to the things that we're probably all doing, putting our lectures online, doing a lot more peer-to-peer, peer-to-teacher collaboration through technology tools, where I think we're going to see some really interesting and important initiatives is in how we might prepare students for the workplace. So I'm expecting to be seeing a real ramping up in simulated work integrated learning, people doing as we're doing now, working from home, engaging with workplaces that they might have in the past gone to and spent some time there. I think we will be ramping up simulations. So how can we be using technology to represent the workplace? Lots of that sort of thing happening in the health sector. I see that happening more broadly. I think the second thing that we're going to really be embracing in the next 3 to 5 years is what technology can tell us about the way that students engage with learning, where we should be intervening positively to deflect students at risk back onto a positive educational and then career path, and how we deal with some of the ethical issues around who that data belongs to and what we do with it. I would like to think that over the next 3 to 5 years, we mature our conversations with our students and with our peers around that data being important to all of us, because it will enable us to give you as a student the best learning experience, the best chance of succeeding in your degree. It will give us as educators insights into what we're doing well, what we need to fix, what we need to grow. So there's a lot happening, obviously. You would expect we, like everybody else, are doing all sorts of things in the classroom, but I would see those two things as being some real game changers for the next 3 to 5 years, above and beyond what we've been doing up to now.
And where do you see micro-credentials and things like that fitting into that?
Part of a spectrum. So clearly we are seeing now, and I think we'll continue to see, people who are already in the workforce needing to come back and reskill. So offering micro-credentials as a flexible kind of learning platform is going to be a really interesting opportunity for universities. I think a really important one for both people in the workforce and their employers. Not everybody needs to do a full-blown master's degree every 3 to 5 years. It's a fairly big investment in time and money. So that clearly those small pockets of learning are going to be important. Yeah. I think there's also some ways that we need to be adopting micro-credentials to value add to our contemporary degrees. So yeah, I think we all understand what a micro-credential might mean for somebody who's just coming to do that. But what would it mean for somebody who's a current student who wants to provide some evidence that's not clear on their testament that they've had a leadership role, or they have engaged in a multidisciplinary entrepreneurial activity where a health student, a creative arts student and an IT student have come together and created a platform to do something? That's not easy to evidence. But that's a really important skill set that if we as a university can certify and provide the evidence through a micro-credential that a student has achieved something above and beyond their degree, then that could be a game changer for students as well. And we can then start to work with employers and with those large databases like LinkedIn that enables us to say, well, in this particular field, these skills are what's important. So can we allow this student in some way to evidence that they've achieved those skills above and beyond getting a distinction in Chemistry 101? So I think there's some really interesting opportunities there that will grow rapidly, I'm sure, and will need to grow rapidly to be able to influence and impact what the contemporary workplace is looking like, particularly as it becomes more constrained and competitive in the next few years.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, that links, I suppose, to this whole notion of democratising higher education. So do you see there are opportunities for technology-enhanced learning in that? How do you see that working at Griffith? I
do, but I think there's some caveats. And I think one of the things that COVID has brought home to me is that the democratisation of education is a possibility, but it's not a guarantee for everybody. We've given out, as you probably know, Michael, millions of dollars in scholarships to students who didn't have Wi-Fi, who didn't have a laptop that they could stream on. I think we have to tackle, as we would with any social situation like that, not just the fact that education is available, but the fact that there are a large number of people in our community, and if you're thinking about internationally, millions of people who might want to access that education who don't have the technology to do so. So I think there's opportunities and responsibilities when it comes to that. So yes, we've got the tools now to be able to produce wonderful MOOCs and micro-credentials that we can produce relatively cheaply and offer at scale, but we've got to do a number of things. It's got to be in a way that is accessible to people that have poor IT access. So maybe they can go to their local library if they have one, but if they're out in Western Queensland with no Wi-Fi and no NBN, what's that going to look like for them to be downloading resources? Never mind if they're in, the middle of Central Africa somewhere where all they've got maybe is a 5-year-old smartphone. That's important. I think to be valuable, education has got to be scaffolded. So you can dip in and do an interesting little MOOC on something or other, but if you don't have a framework in which to apply that, it's an interesting little MOOC in something or other, and it won't necessarily take you to the next level in terms of your self-education. And I think the third thing is the evidence and certification side of this. So well and good that we offer micro-credentials, we do provide certification that person who does that has met a particular standard. But if we're going to truly democratise education, can we, if 1 million people do a Griffith MOOC on something or other, or a micro-credential, do we have the capacity to be able to say that all of these people have met a certain standard, and therefore that becomes a more valuable commodity than just completing something for interest's sake? So I think it's an interesting and complex question. The simple answer is yes, technology will allow us to democratise education, absolutely. The printing press allowed us to democratise education to some extent 400-500 years ago, but people had to learn to read first, I guess. And I think we're up against some of the similar sort of challenges, that we're not all in an equal situation. We don't all have access to the tools that we would need to be able to really leverage that. So I think we've got to be very mindful, if that is our goal, that what we produce for a much broader audience that won't necessarily have access to the technology and the resources has to be pitched at that sort of audience. That's not necessarily what we might do for providing micro-credentials to a business partner who wants to upskill their workforce and they all have schmick laptops, etc., sitting on their desk. Then if we really wanted to look at what we could be doing for much more deprived communities who probably need that education even more than people who are already in the workforce. Yeah. So I think some really interesting social as well as educational challenges.
It really highlights which is highlighted in the Horizon report from 2020, is this whole notion of digital equity.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Anyway, so any last thoughts or inspirational thoughts that you might have to share with us?
I would hate us to come out of the end of this time without thinking that we've changed for the better. I think we'll all get to the end of 2020 and think, oh my goodness, that would have to be one of the worst years we've ever lived through. But I do see some real sparks of initiative, ingenuity, and I think when we've all had a bit of a break and a chance to refresh and reflect on this, none of us are going to be working in the same way, and that's true for the education system, it's true for universities, for researchers, but it's true broadly across the community. I think we've got to seize this as a positive disruption, not necessarily. I mean, it's obviously, it has and will have for some time some very negative connotations, but it is an imperative for us to reinvent ourselves. I think we're all questioning what's really important, what matters, what's valuable. Are we going to be sustainable? Are we going to be able to survive as a fit-for-purpose institution and sector? I would like to think that we take the time to reflect on this. What have we learnt? Not to necessarily jump back to the old ways. I don't think we will. There'll be a little bit of a regression, I'm sure, but we've done things that we never would have done without this, and we have to seize and leverage that.
Cool. Wonderful. Look, thanks so much, Debra, taking a few minutes out of your extremely busy schedule at this time, and really appreciate it. So thank you.
Thanks, Michael, and all the best with your project. Thank you.